call this meeting to order. Can we all rise for the pledge? Mr. Timniak, can you lead us in the pledge?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Just quickly, since we did have a big storm event last night, just to quickly run through a summary of what took place. We obviously got a lot more rain than predicted, and that led to 36 cars getting towed because they got caught in the water. That led to 20 people having to be rescued from those cars. I just want to repeat again that the guideline is, please don't try to drive through standing water. A number of people did last night and got caught. We had, I think the prediction was originally for about a ½ inch of rain. We got close to 6 inches as best we can tell. There's some different news reports out on that, but as best we can tell, it was close to 6 inches. I want to thank the ECC, our 911 call center, that got an inordinate number of calls yesterday, especially as this storm kicked in, because it kicked in very quickly and very significantly. Also want to thank our police, fire, and DPW for getting out and helping manage the impact on the storm. We had about 1,000 people out of power. They were all restored by this morning, and all the roads that were flooded were cleared by this morning as the rain receded. We did send teams of fire, police, and health department representatives out to the neighborhoods most severely impacted, so they could literally survey the neighborhoods, but also talk to the residents to see if they had any questions and make sure we understood that. So we tried to be comprehensive in our response to that. As many people have heard, there is some more rain predicted for this evening. As we're seeing, the storm cells that come through are much more intense, but also in shorter duration than perhaps we're used to. So there are thunderstorms that may or may not have a significant impact. We've been lucky so far. Excuse me, Jerry, if I could?
I'm sorry, Joe.
We're having a meeting here.
Yeah, I know.
The winds, we were fortunate, did not pick up, so we did not have, I believe there was one branch that fell across the street, but there weren't reports of any trees being down of any significance. We're hoping that the wind gusts that may or may not accompany the thunderstorms tonight will also be of a nature that don't cause any more tree damage. Obviously, with the ground this wet, if winds pick up, we're concerned about trees coming down. So just ask everybody to pay attention and stay safe tonight as that takes place. With that as an intro, first item up then are the minutes. To consider and act upon the minutes from a regular meeting of July 11th, 2018, and this item was postponed from September 5th, 2018. May I have a motion to accept?
Make a motion?
A second?
Second.
Any further discussion on the minutes?
No, we reviewed.
Yeah, no,
what
I
we
looked at
talked
them, they
about,
were spot on.
We're okay.
Okay. All right. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Aye. Next up, to consider and act upon the minutes from the regular meeting of September 5th, 2018. May I have a motion to accept?
Make a motion?
A second.
Second.
Any comments or edits to those minutes?
I have none.
Nope.
We okay? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right. The minutes are out of the way. Next up, resignations, and this is for information only, but from the Fair TV Commission, Todd Chandler, Republican, from 65 Hilltop Drive, on a term from 7/17 to 7/20. He resigned as of September 17th, 2018. And then on the Shellfish Commission, Richard Ferrari, a Democrat, from 153 Figler Avenue, on a term from 11/14 to 11/19, and his resignation date was August 30th, 2018. Next item up are appointments. To hear, consider, and act upon, we've got 2 to the Sustainable Fairfield Task Force. Do you want to take those one at a time, or can we take those together?
You can do it together.
Okay. All right, to hear, consider, and act upon the following appointments to the Sustainable Fairfield Task Force. Kirsten Chu, Democrat, 184 Figler Avenue, and this is to fill a new seat that was added when the charge was revised. And B, Sustainable Fairfield Task Force, Sean O'Sullivan, Democrat, 1161 Melville Avenue, and this is to fill a new seat that was added when the charge was revised. May I have a motion to accept?
Make a motion.
A second.
Second.
And then if I can just add for clarification, when we revised the Clean Energy Task Force charge to become the Sustainable Fairfield Task Force, that created a much more comprehensive look at sustainability. And one of the things we talked with the committee and the chair at that point was potentially adding people, since they'd have more areas to look into and be responsible for developing a plan that was much broader than just clean energy. So that's where these come from. We didn't set a number, so if there are other folks that are interested in being on a sustainable task force, we're happy to hear about that. We did say that we would add folks as appropriate because the mission got much broader, which is really good for the town and really good for sustainability, but much broader at that point. Any further comments on the two people in question?
No.
Are you here today? No. Thank you for your willingness to serve.
Okay. Yes, I know I had a chance to talk to both. I had very good conversations. It's great to see this kind of enthusiasm for sustainability in our town. And I think I look at everything that's going on, and I know we've got our application into Sustainable Connecticut to kind of see where we fall within that. And we've got our fingers crossed that we got as many points as we hope in that regard, but we will hear back within the next month or so on that. We hear back in the next month or so on that. Looking forward to that. Any comments from the public? Seeing none, back to the board. Ready to vote?
Yes.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right, thank you, and thank you for stepping up to volunteer. All right, next up, from the Director of Health to consider and act upon the following resolution as recommended by the Director of Health. Whereas, per Connecticut General Statute, Section 19A 202, full-time health
Motion
departments.
to waive the reading if you want it.
All right, a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Mr. Clare, would you just give us an executive summary of this for the folks
Sure.
at home that didn't have a chance to not read this?
Yeah, sure. This is the annual per capita grant that we get for the past several decades. It's a relatively the same amount of money every year. We support two part-time positions, a clerical position, a project coordinator position, both part-time, and then some sub-part-time positions that help us do the work of working towards accreditation and digitizing all of our paper records, and we're in the process of scanning that in. We're 2 letters away from finishing that, so.
Very good. Any questions from the board?
How does the grant fluctuate up and down?
So it typically, most years goes up a little bit because of the increase in population estimates, so it's $1.18 per person.
It's population, right?
Yeah, so some years, like this one, the state cut it a little bit, this year, so we lost a few $1,000s, but,
Why
so.
would the state cut it?
So they passed the budget last year, and they, the dollar amount, the governor reduced the dollar amount, and so, but they had already dispersed the first half, and so this year we took a bigger cut. We took both years' cuts this year, so we lost a couple $1,000s, in that.
Any other questions?
No.
All right. Any comments from the public? All right, seeing none. Sands, thank you very much. Very. All right. And Sands, just one final question. After we approve this and we will get this amount of money, there aren't any cuts to be had with this, right?
That's correct, yes. The budget, the state budget is set for now, so the funds are there. It's just a matter of, once the approvals are all received.
All right, very good. No further questions. Are we ready to vote?
Yeah.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next up, from the Director of Public Works, to hear a status update on the Public Works yard. I believe there's a motion.
Yeah, I'd like to make a motion to table this for our next meeting, Ken.
Okay, postpone to a date certain
To a date certain.
at our next meeting, which I believe is October 3rd.
Next week, right?
Right.
Yep.
That
yeah,
okay?
that works for me. Yeah, and I apologize for not getting back to you on this.
No problem. Any further comments? Is there a second?
Second.
All right. Any further comments? All in favor?
Aye.
All right. Joe, thank you for coming, but we'll see you next Wednesday. All right. Next up, to hear an update from the Mill Hill Elementary School Building Committee. Mr. Quinn?
I'm Tom Quinn, 88 Milo Street, Fairfield, Connecticut, and I'm the chair of the Mill Hill School Building Committee. And we were charged by the Board of Finance to go to SD designs for 378, 441, and a 504 school size. Okay? And everything we've been doing, and the charge from this board was also the same one, has been doing against that. In fact, we're getting ready to finalize architects, and up to this point, we've been pushing against those 3 SD models. Before we did that, however, as we looked at it as a committee, we realized that we're spending about $200,000, okay, in money, real money, to get those 3 SDs performed at the different levels. And so we thought it would be a good idea to make sure everybody that was voting for this realized that that's what it cost. Okay, ballpark cost, because we don't have a bid on it, obviously. So we presented that to the Board of Finance. They would prefer us to continue to go for 3 SDs. I going to present last night to the Board of Ed. Obviously, that didn't happen, and I didn't go through any water. And I'm here tonight, and bottom line, we'll march off against any direction this body tells us to go.
Thank you. Any comments from the board?
One, I thank you for putting the summary together. I've reviewed it, and I've looked at what the Board of Finance has requested. I hear your concerns about doing all 3. What's the cost to just do 1?
Just to do one,
Yeah, if we were to pick.
probably in the neighborhood of 90,000 to 120,000.
So you think it's 200K below to do all 3?
Yeah.
So I'm starting to come to the belief that I think that the town needs to hear all 3, and that way we can better make a rational judgment. The building size has been something which has been kicked around and debated. There's been pros, there's been cons. There's a high side, there's a low side. I think stopping the flow of information could be detrimental to getting it forward. When you interview I guess you're down to 3 final architects?
Yes.
Have they talked about 3 adding length to the project, doing all 3 adding length to?
No.
No.
We will give them the due dates.
Okay,
If they can't make it, they shouldn't be there.
all right. So that wouldn't be an issue of doing 3? Okay.
Do you have any
Yeah,
questions or comments?
Yeah, just a quick one. I mean, given that price differential, I'm still of the opinion, I think we should keep our options open for the near term.
I would ask that as you're looking at architects now, that perhaps one of the first tasks you give the architect in looking at it, whether we have to bring all 3 designs to completion or not, is taking a look at the topography of the site, because that's one of the questions that's come up in a number of discussions. And have the architect look at the 380, 440, and 504, and see whether those building sizes will in fact fit on this topography, whether that would work. And then second, that we, in fact, one of the early tasks we do is we engage a traffic consultant to look at on-site traffic, as well as
Near site.
neighborhood traffic. And two thoughts come to mind with that. One is that currently we have, I believe, 350 students in this site. I know we've had a number of traffic issues so far this year. So my first question is the site big enough to take 100 more students and associated traffic and buses, et cetera, or 200 more students, or 150 more students going up to 504
Yeah, I know
roughly?
what you mean.
And then also what the impact on the neighborhood is, because every other school we seem to have, with the exception, I don't know if there's an exception, the other elementary schools all seem to be in their own little place. And I'm thinking of Holland Hill, I'm thinking of Riverfield, where they're kind of set back, they're off, they're not, whereas this one is right in smack dab in the middle of the neighborhood. And there are two major cross streets there, Mill Hill and Mill Hill Terrace, and those have a tremendous amount of traffic on them, even at this level, from what I hear back. And what I'd like to do is take it from being anecdotal stories to some real data.
Absolutely.
Some studies is what, and I think if you look at those, and if those two points of information, what will fit on the site, and the amount of traffic that will be generated at different sizes, if those things start to impact something we shouldn't do, then I would encourage you to come back to this board and say, here's why I would like to cut out one of these sites, or one of these options. But prior to that, I think that we're dealing with anecdotal information, and if we're going to be spending $25 million or thereabouts, spending $200,000,
Thank you.
$200,000 more, to make sure that's the right decision, I would
It's
agree with
only
you,
80,
Mr. Bateman,
yeah.
that, you're right, it's only 80, it's not 200,000, it seems to me money well spent to get to that point.
Done.
Is that clear enough for you and your committee?
Absolutely.
Gentlemen, is that a fair?
No, that was spot on. I think you're right, that if something starts to get generated that's going to adversely impact the neighborhood, or the site can't tolerate it, we need to know that sooner than later.
And that may get you back to saying, we've taken the exploration this far, we don't have to spend any more money exploring other options if this is where we are.
Not a problem.
Okay. And because I know that wasn't part of the original analysis at any point, none of that site exploration, or does the site and topography fit this, wasn't part of the information that your committee was given ahead of time, because I don't believe that question's been asked or evaluated.
Well, it has, but that's part of the architectural. We do that on every school. There is a site, okay, geothermal, site, traffic, that's all what we do. Okay, and then we look at that versus what we want to build. Okay, here, we'd have to look at that against the three alternatives.
And I think that to get to that point, I don't think you have to design all the interior walls, what's taking
I
place. You don't have to
certainly
do
would
the
Yeah.
full analysis to do that. We're really looking at,
I don't think you can worry about that.
okay. All right, Mr. Quinn, thank you very much.
Thank you, Tom.
You okay?
Thank you, Ms. Quinn.
All right, next up, we have a presentation from the Strategic Planning Committee. To hear an update from the Strategic Plan Committee. Mr. Nguyen, if you'll take us through it. Mr. Gross, if you'll take us through this.
Very good, thank you. I'm joined by two members of the committee, Jay Gross, who's the vice chair of the committee, and Patty Dyer, who's sitting in the audience, is another member. I thought it'd be beneficial to just allow the members of the board to recognize who they are and just have them participate as questions may come up. So we, as is our custom and practice, we prepared and circulated some material. I'll try and take you quickly through it. Jay will join in the latter part of the presentation. The objective here is to provide you with the quarterly update as identified in our charge. There's some additional information that I'll walk us through as we go forward. And the materials, I believe, is available on the Board of Selectmen website, agenda, and meeting materials. Page 2 has a set of topics that we'll take you through. It's about 15 pages of material. We can talk through it very quickly, and then allow some time for Q&A at the end if need be. Page 3, the objective today is to provide you a quarterly update as required by our charge and the standards that we're following. We want to describe the next phase of work that we'll be undertaking, which is the community engagement phase, which was one of our critical success factors, and present the material that's being shared with the community regarding the strategic plan initiative, so that everyone here and members of the community that might be watching on TV achieve an understanding of what we're trying to do regarding strategic planning and the project and the initiative. Also allow us to receive feedback and questions from the board so that we can modify or adjust what we're doing. Page 4, the long list of bullets. Basically, I'm trying to provide an update of what we've accomplished between the May Board of Selectmen update and today. So The major achievements are that we planned and conducted 2 rounds of interviews. The interviews, and I'll give you a subset or a synopsis of what the interviews are in a slide or two. It includes the major stakeholders here in town: boards, commissions, elected officials, town department heads, a number of businesses that are residents here in town, a number of service providers to the community, the universities, and a variety of other people. You'll see that on the pie chart in a minute. We've deployed and are starting to develop and starting to deploy project web tools, which will include a project website, surveys that every resident in the community can take if they wish, other types of information to gather the community's perspective and thoughts on areas of the town that are opportunities and challenges as we consider a strategic planning process. We've participated in a number of town meetings and events, such as the TOD meetings that have occurred, Sea Level Rise meeting, that sort of thing. We're continuing to monitor the set of topics that we drafted and created to begin working with the consultant on strategic issues that are of importance to the town. Held and conducted our regular meetings. Moving down to the next steps. Big set of activities we're going to be undertaking now is the community engagement and outreach. That involves activities with a community workshop, which would be a large format, 100 plus people in attendance, obtaining information about the strategic planning status and process, and then also allow them the opportunity to ask questions and interact with the consultants that we're leveraging as part of this project. We're doing other project work that's documented in the project plan to just keep things moving here. But as I mentioned, community engagement is the next big phase. If we move over to page 5, we identify the in-person types of workshops that we anticipate. The community workshop we've scheduled for November 7th at 7:15 p.m. at Penfield Pavilion. We're going to go through a marketing process for that, where we leverage collateral, marketing collateral and information, posters in stores, a large digital media push, information in the print periodicals that are available here in town, so that everyone in town can be made aware of this workshop and allow them the opportunity to either participate or to recognize that there are other web types of tools they can use to provide their feedback. So we want to make sure we're really being inclusive to provide an in-person forum, but then also tools through technology to allow people that can't participate in person to provide their input. Chris?
Is there a town office helping you with the PR push? Or are you guys doing that on your own?
We have a subcommittee of the Strategic Plan Committee working on it. We're working with members of the First Selectmen's office to identify contacts, identify media, that sort of thing. We've talked with Mr. Tetra about leveraging the First Selectmen's blog, town-adjacent web presences to help try and market it. So I think the easier answer is yes.
Great.
It's a multifaceted answer to the question, though.
No, that's perfect. That's what I was-
Including while they're here at the Board of Selectmen meeting and on Fair TV, so that the town gets the updates as we do.
Right, and we're also going to try and engage Fair TV to cover the community workshop event, so that if people can't be at the meeting, then they would be able to view it offline later on a recorded broadcast.
And that's the November 7th workshop,
That's
right?
November 7th workshop.
The one at 7:15?
The one at 7:15.
Okay, just checking.
Can we formally request Fair TV cover that as the Board of Selectmen?
Well, we've made the request. I know they're managing different things. We're going to work over the next few weeks to figure out how to get them there, or how to have an alternative approach that could accomplish, maybe not the fine standards that Fair TV follows, but something that would allow the community to hear a playback of what that meeting is. So
Well,
we'll
and-
work on that.
And perhaps, since that evening is also one where we're anticipating having a Board of Selectmen meeting, if we had the Board of Selectmen in the same venue, it might make it easy for Fair TV to then record their meeting. We just have to make sure we get done by 7:15 so they can pick it up. So perhaps we can consider that to help along with it.
Or we could ask all of the 100-some-odd people we're going to try and get to the meeting to come here and join us in this room.
No,
Oh, yes.
I prefer not.
We can bust them over afterwards.
So just to close out on page 5, in-person workshops and remote digital approaches to allow people all over to provide their input. Mr. Timniak?
Yeah, I had a second one. Student workshops.
Several components to student workshops. And Jay can cover this a little bit better than I can. He's been more closely involved in it, so maybe.
Okay, well,
Jay, if I
so-
could ask you to go to the podium, please.
Oh, all right.
That's where the microphone is.
But I try and project, so, first of all, student workshops, would like to thank, well, Dr. Jones was here, but I'd like to thank her anyway. She's helped us get dates for workshops at both high schools. So we're going to have a workshop at Ludlow and a workshop at Ward. We've also talked to a coordinator that she's assigned to get an elementary school included, and we're going to try and do that actually up front. Seems everybody's pretty excited about that, and then also work through the middle schools after that. In addition to K through 12, we're also going to be working with the university presidents in order to get workshops scheduled at each of the universities.
That was my question. Are we doing high school and college, or was that more college-focused workshops? I'm glad to hear that it's encompassing everything from elementary through.
Well, the university students is a pretty large population, has a big impact on the town, both tactically and strategically. So
Yes.
the answer is yes.
Great. Thank you.
Okay.
So the challenge with the in-person workshops is to be able to try and do them when we bring the consultants here, we try and pack their schedule as much as possible. The community workshop is a big event, and that's a cornerstone one. These other ones, the student workshops, a joint board and commission potential workshop, a business workshops, or a smaller type of workshop, we're going to figure out the piece parts to get those arrayed during the time the consultants are here. Some of them may happen, some of them may not. We're going to do our best to make sure we cover those in a variety of different fashions. So, all set on page 5, go to page 6. So, key thing on page 6, we want to hear people's comments, suggestions, and ideas. There's many different ways to do that. On this page, we identify, attend our meetings, provide feedback at our SPC, Strategic Planning Committee, webpage on the town website. And the website is identified here. I won't read it. It's just too confusing to do that. There's a community input form on that website right now. You can provide your input. We're going to be leveraging the consultant's project website for this initiative, at which there will be the surveys, document distribution, a variety of different things. We're going to launch that the early part of October. It'll give us enough time for it to be running for a few weeks ahead of the workshop in November. And I think we'll all find that very interesting to work with. Participate in the community workshop in November. And then there's other approaches we're going to try and leverage, which include things like a do-it-yourself workshop, which is a small venue type of workshop for like a community association or a philanthropic organization or religious entity where they might get 10 to 15 or 20 people together in a room. We have a standard set of questions where people would provide their feedback, and that would all be great input. So as many of those, we're going to try and leverage the members of the committee to do those in various different parts of the town. Also with the RTM, we're going to try and do one of those do-it-yourself type of workshops for each one of the 10 RTM districts. We already have that planning steps underway to coordinate that with them. So we're going to try and do a multifaceted outreach, which will give in-person and web capability for people to provide input. Moving over to page 7. This is the pie chart I alluded to earlier, just a quick summary of the interviews. The interviews were critical to provide the consultants an understanding of the issues here in town, the opportunities here in town, the considerations that people thought about. We array around this pie chart the 64 interviews that were conducted in the in-person 2 sessions that we had. In addition to that, we're doing certain select supplemental follow-up phone interviews with different people, so the actual number will probably wind up around 70 people. But we have university representation, nonprofit representation, all the town boards, commission, department heads, to a large extent were involved. Emergency services, medical services, senior services, dining, entertaining, hospitality. So we have a pretty good cross-section of town with the information that the people that we interviewed. And this means our resident outreach has already occurred because many of the people that participated in the interviews were town residents. So they probably provided perspective to the consultants of their issue and the position they hold, yet also as town residents. So with that, I'll move to page 8. So page 8 has some information on it that when I prepared this deck wasn't quite complete or wasn't 100% final. We're still doing some final refinements, but we talked about project branding and that being a critical element to the initiative. What we did was we crafted, as members of the committee, a tagline, I would say. And that tagline is Fairfield's Future, One Town, One Vision. That's the tagline that we thought resonated after 40 or 50 of them that we brainstormed and worked with. We wanted to try and combine that with some imagery that was recognition of the town, kind of insightful, maybe forward-leaning, thinking, that sort of thing. And we actually developed something that, if you'll, this is what we've worked with. So I think Mr. Testro has seen this already. I'll hold it for the camera in a second. But Fairfield's Future, One Town, One Vision, leveraging the image of a lighthouse, shining a beacon out to show us kind of the direction forward, what we're trying to achieve. So on our branding, on our marketing collateral, on our website, on whatever material we have in front of the public, we're going to try and leverage that branding to give the imagery of looking out to the future, one town, one direction, one vision. So, you can just grab that.
Do you want to hold it up for the camera?
You will all see that on the website and other material. So moving over to from page 8, the next set of slides, what Jay's going to take us through are the slides that are a subset of what we're leveraging to provide the town with information about what strategic planning is all about, why it's important, what are some of the considerations we need to have. It's a subset of the slides that a lot of people in town will be able to access from the project webpage or the town webpage, and probably will see in a variety of different meetings that they have. So if we have time, we'll take you through that.
Okay, so this is the presentation that we're going to be sharing with the public, and we're going to be sharing with the public through updates of the progress of the project, as well as introduction to the various workshops. So I wanted to take you through this. I'm not necessarily going to read all the words on the chart, but kind of take you through the messaging. The first thing we thought we would do is obviously introduce, what is a strategic plan, for the simple reason that not everybody has had the opportunity to participate in one. To mention the fact that it is the highest level operating plan that an organization has. All the other plans that the town uses to operate are really subordinate to that. Those are probably the plans that most folks in the town are probably familiar with. It's a little longer term, and as I said, higher level. To also take the opportunity to introduce what I'll call, top-line issues. So, economic development, taxes, spending, education. Those top-line issues are pretty consistent from community to community. There's nothing unique about Fairfield in that regard. How we feel about those are unique to us. And so that's the point of the project, is to be able to identify a consensus around how the town feels about those, and to be able to, go forward from there. So if you look at the next chart, so that would be chart 11. So the next logical question is, why now? Fairfield has never done a strategic plan, so it's a fair question to ask, right? Since we've never done one, Fairfield's a really nice place to live. So why do we need to do one today? What's different about today? And the fact is that there are two major subcurrents, right, that are going on today. One is at the state level, and while we can't necessarily do anything directly about what's going on at the state level, there's obviously an impact on the town. That aside, there's other societal changes that are impacting the town. So even if all the stuff with the state wasn't going on, technology has changed the demographics associated with the town, creating a large work-at-home population. The styles of living have changed with millennials, and so those issues in and of itself are going to cause the town to need to address things we've never had to address before. You put those two things together, and depending on how we address those things, are going to determine our competitiveness with surrounding towns. So the simple answer Why now? Is because we're going to be faced with things that we've never been faced with before. So what is the process? So if you go to the next page, this, at a very, very high level, is how we're going to describe the process. So you begin doing a lot of research, which the Strategic Plan Committee has been doing for the larger part of the last year. You then do the interviews, which kind of John took you through, and we're now beginning the community outreach phase, which, again, the date to remember is?
November 7th.
Very good, okay. Just checking to see everybody's paying
At
attention.
7:15.
At 7:15, okay, perfect. So this step of the process is very important because there are a lot of different ways to go around creating a strategic plan. A bunch of people can sit down in a room and they can create one on their own, whether or not that's insourced or outsourced, or the more, I think, more thoughtful, harder process is to engage the community actively. And that's why we're making sure that these workshops are being done across the various constituents of our town, across business, residents, renters, students, K through 12, and so on and so forth. After that process, after all the workshops are done, then you go through a step where you're analyzing all that data, you're filtering out and condensing all the options and the trade-offs, and you're creating a plan. So at a very, very high level, that's the process, right? So the next three charts to kind of get to the point, okay, so when we're all done, so what's the objective of all of this? You look at everybody's viewpoints, you do a little analysis, and you create a picture of desirability. So as we've done our research, most communities essentially boil down this term desirability into these three high-level characteristics: safety, affordability, and attractiveness. And so at the end of the day, we want to be able to create a view of the desirability of Fairfield that we want to get to as we go through that process. The next chart is really the detail behind that, because again, all communities would define desirability in those terms: safe, affordable, attractive. The next page kind of gets to the next level of detail in terms of how we define those things are going to determine the unique characteristics of the desirability of Fairfield. And so in the end, and this is chart 15, next to the last chart, so we can create then a very accurate picture of Fairfield today. So on the left-hand side, we've got a picture of Fairfield today. Where we want to get to, the net objective, is to have a picture of desirability for Fairfield that either maintains or grows those characteristics, so that Fairfield is safer, Fairfield is more affordable, and Fairfield is more attractive. The process to get there is going to help us identify both the challenges to do that and the options and trade-offs associated with dealing with those, as well as the opportunities that we're going to uncover that we may not have an opportunity to uncover if we didn't go through a process like that. And so the last chart that we're going to use in talking to the community is to just share with the community some examples about what we would consider non-strategic versus strategic issues, to make sure people are focused on those higher level characteristics that we really want to focus people on in order to be able to create a strategic plan. So that's it. Any questions or feedback?
Gentlemen?
I would say thank you for the presentation again. I met with the consultants. I think we had a very good hour. They asked some very in-depth questions. I'm letting the public know, this is a very thorough job your committee's doing. The consultants came in and were extremely prepared, talking about the issues which are facing Fairfield, and they asked, very legitimate, concerning questions about the future development, what we want to see. They seemed to know that this is a serious effort by the town we're putting forward to get a very good plan. So I have nothing but confidence coming out of your committee and the consultants right now, and I want to thank you and the committee members for the time you put in.
I
Thanks,
agree.
Chris.
I think they're very experienced, credentialed, national-level consultants, bringing us experience and ideas that are outside of the immediate patch of space that we all live in and exist in. So I think it's a very healthy, beneficial process.
John, I thought I was going to get a generic, run-of-the-mill, interview for an hour, and it was beyond my expectations with the in-depth questions and the knowledge they already brought to the town. So I was very impressed with it. So.
Mr. Bateson?
Yeah, no, same thing. I didn't know what to expect walking in that room for the interview. I was kind of winging it, and, they opened up and we were walking down paths. I was like, wow, it was very impressive. I was very, very impressed with their knowledge and just the way the conversation went.
Well, thank you. I appreciate you sharing that with us.
Yeah. And I would concur with my colleagues. I also want to point out that I'm very impressed with just the section on here talking about your community engagement and outreach. I think that is critical to the success of this, but also the educating our community in terms of how to participate in this. So I want to thank you for doing that as extensively as you did as you look at this approach. So look forward to future updates.
Okay, thank you.
All right. And it's, what, November 7th, you said?
At what time?
7:15?
At 7:15.
All right, and the location is
Penfield Pavilion.
Penfield Pavilion. All right, we'll see you then.
Thank you all,
Thank you,
gentlemen.
guys.
All right. Next up, to hear, consider, and endorse a complete streets policy for the town of Fairfield. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Good evening. My name is Keith Gallinelli. I'm the chair of the Bicycle and Pedestrian Committee for the town of Fairfield. I wanted to just provide a little bit of an overview for everyone to get us on the right page, and then I'm going to turn it over to my committee, who is going to bring us up to date with what they have done. As you know, we're a town committee that's part of the first Selectmen has endorsed us. And I just wanted to read the vision. This is a vision of our committee that was established from the Bike and Pedestrian Master Plan from 2013. We have some members over here as part of that. But basically, the town of Fairfield recognizes the need to encourage walking and biking for transportation, recreation, exercise, and quality of life. Walking and biking conserve energy, improve air quality, reduce traffic and the need for parking, improve health and fitness, invigorate the local economy through increased access to local businesses and greater potential for tourism. These community-wide benefits will be achieved through institutional, planning, enforcement, education, and infrastructure actions. So, as we've been a part of this committee for the last 3 or 4 years, we started out really with doing some of the easier tasks. We did some infrastructure work, adding some bike routes to the town, signage, going in front of the police commission to get these things approved, working with various educational organizations and schools to do the outreach with safety, working with the police department, doing some bike rodeos. The History Museum has been fantastic. We just had a very successful history ride. It's the 3rd or 4th one that we've done with the History Museum, and it's really starting to attract some people for that. About 2 years ago, we decided that one of the things we would like to do is to move away from some of the events and some of the smaller items and work more with policy. And so we identified one of our goals and our objectives back in 2017 was to prepare the Fairfield Complete Streets Policy, the draft version of it. We had done that, we completed that last year. This year, one of our final objectives was to have the proposed Fairfield Complete Streets Policy endorsed by the Board of Selectmen so that it becomes an official policy of the town. We were here on May 15th, I believe, and we presented the first edition of that to you. It's gone through several iterations, and thanks to the good people at Fair TV, I know our committee watched the entire must-see TV version of that meeting to go through and make sure that they addressed each and every comment, request, and any issue that was brought up in that meeting, and they went one by one, step by step, to address those issues. And so over the last 2 or 3 months, that's what they've been working on, we've been working on, and what we're going to be doing is presenting to you the final version of that policy, and I'm going to turn that over to my colleagues here, and they're going to present their latest and greatest. So thank you very much, and I appreciate your time for going in front of the committee today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Keith. Good afternoon. My name is Ann Cadis, and I'm here with Laura O'Brien and Bill Pollock. Together, we are the Government Subcommittee of the Fairfield Bicycle and Pedestrian Committee. We're here today to present our Complete Streets policy. Laura, Bill, and I had our first conference call about complete streets close to 2.5 years ago. Since then, we've been working diligently to research, write, and revise this policy to get where we are today. The main starting point for our work was with Smart Growth America, a national organization that is dedicated to bringing better development to communities nationwide through research and leadership. As a national leader on complete streets, Smart Growth America provides guidance for authors of complete street policies in cities, towns, and states across the country. In addition to researching national guidelines, we also connected with towns in our state that have been through the process of adopting complete streets. Towns such as West Hartford and Middletown were quite informative and helpful to us along the way. Much of my work was in research. One main thread that emerged is how quickly complete streets is becoming something expected of towns. Many private, state, and federal funding sources now use the existence of a complete streets policy to grade grant applications. Also, complete streets projects open up additional funding sources and are now getting funded over other projects. One example of such is the most recent Tiger grants. In March 2018, 16% of the awards went to complete street projects, more than rail and transit combined. So I am now going to turn this over to Bill Pollock, the head of our government subcommittee, to begin his presentation.
Thanks, Ann. Just going to put a board up. Take a minute here. So as Keith and Ann touched upon, we have presented this back early in summer to this board and went through the policy at that time. And so we'd like to give you a bit of a refresher on that. Mr. Basin was not there at that time, so we want to make sure that we relay all of that information for your benefit as well. We started out very early in this process with meeting with different town departments. We met with TPZ staff, we met with the DPW staff. I should note that Bill Hurley, the town engineer, and Santina Giranco from the health department are on our bicycle and pedestrian committee, and so they have been really instrumental in how we have drafted this policy. Their feedback and their support has been a big part of where we've gotten to today. We also met with the police department traffic safety unit. We presented before the police commission. We met with the Economic Development Commission and Mark Barnhart separately as well. We've been in touch with MetroCog along the way as we've been developing this policy, the American Heart Association, Smart Growth America itself, the Sustainability Task Force, and other interested community members and stakeholders. So we've been gathering all of this input all along the way to make sure that this policy was comprehensive and took into consideration the feedback from the town staff and the departments. You probably have seen in your packets a number of letters of support from a lot of those different departments and organizations, basically, showing their support for this plan that we've developed. We also, some feedback that we got at the last meeting was to make sure that the town attorney was comfortable with it, and we made a few revisions to the policy to make sure that he was, and he has offered his support as well and said he feels totally comfortable with the wording in it. from a legal standpoint. So what are complete streets? Well, complete streets are streets, highways, roadways, travelways, corridors that are designed and operated to enable safe and comfortable access for all users. Now, all users of the roadways include pedestrians, bicyclists, public transit riders, people of all abilities, cars, trucks, buses, freight, and all other modes of transportation. Historically, roadways, not just in Fairfield and in Connecticut, but nationwide, were always designed to move traffic generally as quickly as possible with as less impediments as possible, but it tended to disregard any of the other users that might be accessing the roadway, like pedestrians and bicyclists and others. So this has been a movement now, over 10 years now, the Complete Streets movement, I should say, nationwide. There's over 1,200 policies nationwide, and that includes municipalities, state policies, regional policies. There's about a dozen in Connecticut so far. West Hartford, Portland, Connecticut, New Haven, Stamford, Stratford, Enfield. There's several, and more to come. We know of others, other municipalities that are working on it as well. Some of the benefits of having a policy is certainly safety. When roads are designed and roadways and intersections are designed to consider all users of the road, they're safer. They think about signage at the right place. They think about ADA. Obviously, ADA is code, and it always has to be considered, but it's certainly stressed in the Complete Streets policy. Crosswalks, pavement markings, and it's these sorts of improvements also are usually not costly, especially when they're considered right at the beginning of a project. Is what this policy suggests is that when planners are redoing a major roadway or redesigning a major roadway or renovating something, a transportation project, this now guides them to consider all of the users. So at that time, if they are putting in new sidewalks, they're thinking about the width of them in the right location, the relationship to the curbs, the relationships to street trees, and having perhaps vegetation buffers in between sidewalks and cars and parking strips. And it just makes the planner go through the process of thinking about everybody involved. And oftentimes, as you know, that those planners are outside consultants, they're traffic engineers, they're landscape architects, they're civil engineers, but oftentimes the designers are in-house as well. Our own engineering department and our own Department of Public Works not only reviews all of the consultant designs, but they are sometimes doing the designs themselves. Other benefits, when roadways are designed with the Complete Streets approach, generally leads to more walkable, more livable neighborhoods, which are places that people frankly just like to live in, want to be in. That often leads to property values being increased, more private development, and we can say these things because there's a whole load of information that we've been studying over the last couple of years that's available from Smart Growth America and other transportation type organizations that keep tabs of these things, and they've done case studies on a number of different Complete Streets projects that were done in all different kinds of municipalities of all sizes throughout the country. And so they show that that when these projects are done, they tend to be safer for everybody. They tend to be a more attractive neighborhood, a more livable neighborhood, a more walkable neighborhood, things that people are looking for today. And I also say that just having a policy in place, which Ann touched upon, tends to increase the chance that a municipality can get a grant or funding for certain types of transportation projects. It doesn't mean we never would have gotten the grant, but it just adds a level or a layer that we can sort of check that off. We do think that as a town, that Complete Streets are important, that we think that approach is the right way to do it. And so these state and federal grants are starting to look at that, and that counts towards our point score, so to speak, in getting a grant or funding. So just point to the board a little bit here. These are just some examples of different municipalities that have done some work. This is here in Norwalk. Very simple. They had an existing roadway. They didn't move the curb or anything like that. They happen to have an extra wide roadway at this point. But you can see two lanes of traffic, a separate bike lane, actually, a striped sort of buffer area, and then a parking lane, a buffer strip, and then a sidewalk. They were able to really do a tremendous amount of improvements just really by moving some pavement markings around. And they can do that, you know, if the road was scheduled to be repaved and it has to be restriped anyway, then they just restripe it differently if they have the room. In this case, they did. And then you can add some signage for the bike lanes and for the parking and things like that. This is here in Georgetown, Connecticut. They did some major work recently in that area, Georgetown, sort of Reading, Wilton border there. They right off of Route 7, and they ended up rebuilding some roadways there. So they made sure they had a lot of room for sidewalks, a lot of room for crosswalks. They changed the pavement, actually, of the crosswalk. Obviously, it's a different color, but it's also a different material. It stands out. They have very visible pavement markings and the appropriate ADA curb ramps. And so that is a complete streets improvement. And these are the types of things that we can see happening in Fairfield. In West Hartford, this was a bit of a larger scale. Called, it was a major development project that they did, but they basically improved the whole area there for pedestrian circulation. You can see the crosswalks, you can see the large or the wide sidewalks, the street trees. And what they've done here is they've pushed out the sidewalks so that it's less of a distance to try to cross the road for pedestrians. Some of these improvements we know we can do in Fairfield. We wouldn't be reinventing the wheel by any stretch. These are planning improvements that have been done, you know, locally, statewide, nationwide, and we know they work. And we feel like that when a project is, or a street or a transportation project is to be undertaken, we like these things to be considered in that planning process, and that's what this policy is providing guidelines for. The last thing I would say is that in Fairfield, this policy is really intended to provide guidelines for the entire town, so that we understand that we wouldn't necessarily be recommending major infrastructure improvements in Greenfield Hill, like bus stops and sidewalks and things like that. However, there might be some areas in Greenfield Hill that could benefit from a crosswalk or perhaps a sidewalk here or there. So this policy is intended to be context sensitive, so that it's responsive to the particular community or the neighborhood that it would be in. It is flexible in that regard, and it also is flexible in that if a project comes in and it was determined that the improvements, because of the complete streets, added a significant amount of cost, well, then it could be backed off, and that is also worded appropriately in the policy, we think appropriately in the policy, so that it shouldn't make a project cost prohibitive to proceed with. And with that, I will hand it to Laura O'Brien, who has some to add as well.
Thank you. My name is Laura O'Brien, and I'm Vice Chair of the Bicycle and Pedestrian Committee. Whether you are a student looking for a safe way to walk to school, a disabled individual needing handicap ramps, an elderly resident with impaired vision who needs better lighting and marked crosswalks, or someone trying to access a bus stop, a complete streets design can make your trip safer. When I talk about complete streets to people unfamiliar with the concept, their initial assumption is that it's being proposed to make roads more bicycle friendly. I explain that it's actually intended to make roads safer and more accessible for all users. I believe pedestrians may be the biggest beneficiaries of this initiative, and we are all pedestrians. According to the Yukon Crash Data site, in the last 5 years, our town has had 59 pedestrian incidents involving injury. In the last 2 years, 2 of these have been fatal. From 2005 to 2014, 376 people were killed while walking in Connecticut. and the Insurance Institute for Highway Safety recently released a report saying pedestrian deaths have reached their highest level in 28 years. DPW and engineering do a very good job of taking pedestrian needs into account when designing, redesigning, or repaving roadways. A complete streets policy will require that they evaluate their designs against current complete street standards and do what is feasible and practical to improve sidewalks, crosswalks, handicap ramps, signal operations, lighting, bus stop access, and anything else that could enhance pedestrian safety, along with safety and accessibility for all other users. Thank you, and I hope you will be able to endorse the policy this evening. Do you have any questions for our committee, or do you want to hear from
Gentlemen?
others who are here first? I don't know the...
Well, it's your presentation. If you'd like other people to speak, go right ahead. If
I know there are a few people who may wish to speak, so we'll let them go ahead. Thank you. Bill?
Hello, I'm Bill Hurley, Fairfield Engineering Manager. The Engineering Department and DPW do support this policy. It's been, as mentioned before, 4 years in the making. This isn't something that was just willy-nilly. Even when they approached the Board of Selectmen back in May, I was expecting a month or two and we'll be back, and it's been 4 months. They've really been diligent, and as I mentioned before, all the comments that were mentioned in that May meeting, I believe, have been addressed, and they've taken all those comments very seriously. And as mentioned before, Fairfield Department of Public Works and Engineering and even zoning have already incorporated several measures of the Complete Streets policy. And some of the grants that we've gotten, because we're so close to having a Complete Streets policy anyway, we've been able to get several grants. The transportation alternatives and the lot SIP for Kings Highway. Obviously, it's Kings Highway Pedestrian Improvements Project. We have just recently been awarded the Southport Connectivity Grant, which is going to be a lot of safety features involving pedestrians. And we, in the past, about 5-6 years ago, was the Safe Routes to School, you might remember, in the Umpqua area. And the Connecticut Fairfield Health Department, through the Department of Health, has given the town the availability of grant money to continue some of these policies and actual construction. Chris, you are familiar with Stratford. Recently got I believe it was it might have been more, $2-point-something million complete streets grant. So I support it, and so do the departments. So, thank you.
Hi, I'm going to wear a couple hats, but I was supposed to write a letter of endorsement as chair of the, Mary Hove, chair of the Fairfield Forestry Committee right now. And we had voted in our monthly meeting to write a letter of support. As they mentioned, Complete Streets includes planting roadside streets, which, as you heard in great detail at your last meeting, we have a big program related to that. And that affects the health as well as the safety of the people in the town and the town character and property values and all sorts of things. So another reason I wanted to speak was because as part of the group that had worked on our sustainable CT certification, Complete Streets was a very big component of the points that we could get, and we were unable to include that this year. We'll hopefully be able to include it next year when you provide your support for this. And one of the things, or two underpinnings for sustainable CT, which I think is part of Complete Streets, is obviously sustainability and equity. And we talked about all the different ways that the different completeness of all the different users of the streets would be more able to use the streets safely and comfortably. And in terms of sustainability, I've always expressed it as a means of finding efficiencies. Sustainability is the people. It's so we're making it better for the people that are using the streets. We're making better for the environment, because we're calming the traffic, we're putting trees on the roadsides, we're giving people more of a chance to use alternative means of getting around, their feet, bikes, whatever. And it's also profits. It's proven, at least from the street side, roadside streets, that if you make a nice, comfortable place to walk around, people are more likely to spend more time at the shops and buy more things. And there are studies to prove that. So there are a lot of positive reasons, and I hope that you can support this plan policy. Thank you.
Do you have anyone else presenting?
Hi, Santina Duranko. I'm the health educator for the Fairfield Health Department, and I sit as an advisor for the Bike and Ped Committee, and they've done a great job with this policy. Just, from the health department standpoint, we completely endorse this policy. We promote, safe ways for individuals to be physically active, and this policy does that, and it includes all modes of transportation. And I mentioned before, the health department has received a lot of grant money to help change some of the infrastructure here in Fairfield, and a policy like this will just continue that. So, thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Mr. Pollock, anyone else from your group?
I think we're all set. So what we're asking for today is an endorsement of this policy. Back in 2013, actually, when we had our prior committee develop the Fairfield Bicycle and Pedestrian Master Plan, it was endorsed by the Board of Selectmen, and so we're asking for a similar endorsement.
Thank you. Any questions from the board?
First of all, thank you, everybody, for coming. Mary will gladly take your verbal testimony in lieu of the letter. But I appreciate everybody coming out. I intend on supporting this today. Thank you. This is vastly different than what you submitted back in May, which doesn't feel like May. It feels like sometime middle August, the way the months have flown by. But I do have a couple small questions, possibly some edits, but minor in nature.
Sure.
So on page 6, under policy scope, the second paragraph, the new construction projects within the town roadways, maintenance projects. Now, is there a way are we allowed to add state roads to that, or do we have no jurisdiction over state roads and recommendations we can make to them?
Well, we don't have jurisdiction, but we certainly would be in touch with the state on anything that has to do with the state road. DPW is regularly in touch with them on any of the state roads when any improvements are being done, and that would include recommendations put forth by the town, not necessarily just from the state side of it. So while we don't have jurisdiction, the state actually does have its own complete streets policy. That is
So we would be following that one, so we wouldn't need to add it, because I'm trying to make a distinction between, listen, if we have recommendations for the post road, I don't want to be limited to that because it's a state road versus another thing.
That's fair enough. I think at the end of that paragraph, which happens to go to the next page, we just have a note in there that says the town will work together with the state as much as is practical when implementing this policy on state roadways. If you think there's a better way to word that, or more, if something different to say about that, we'd certainly be happy to. But there is a challenge there because we don't have the jurisdiction.
Right, that's one of my concerns, that the state comes in and does something, we don't have the say early enough, and then stopping the state to include something is like trying to stop a oil tanker.
Yeah, what we found, I know, what we found in our research, and a lot of it actually comes from the town of Stratford, feedback from the town of Stratford and their work on complete streets, is when they got in touch with the state as early in the process as possible, because some of their work is, I should say, the work that they're doing initially on complete streets is on state roadways. So what they did was they reached out to the state very early on, and they brought in MetroCog right away. And MetroCog and the town of Stratford together basically got the state to the table. And then the state has stayed there the whole time and this is feedback I was hearing from the town planner there, the state has been there all the way, and therefore they've been involved in the design the entire time, they've been involved in the process, and so they've been comfortable with it. So we would certainly think that's a good strategy going forward.
And I'm assuming most of that would run through Mr. Hurley's office.
And DPW,
As well,
that's
in the
right.
beginning part.
Yeah.
Hey, I was gonna
Yeah.
just say, real quick, you'll have to go up here. The State Department of Transportation, typically, if it's a significant project, will usually hold a public meeting, public informational meeting, where anybody from the public, and we usually have a couple of town representatives also at that meeting, and we could remind the state of their own complete streets policy.
Okay. But if our streets, our policy is,
Has a little bit more bite than
it's
theirs?
our
is that-
standards, not the state standards. I
No,
mean,
if it's a state highway, that would be
Yeah.
their...
yeah, but we would want them to perform to our standards.
We could recommend it,
Yeah.
strongly recommend it.
That's what I'm trying to isolate.
But in
here.
fairness to the state, they're making progress. They really are. The last couple of the state projects that have come by, they have definitely put in a more effort for communication. They typically meet, as Bill alluded to, with some town representatives, even the first selectman, on a particular project. And they are getting better at that, for sure. So, thank you.
So, another thing I want to just quickly talk about, that's on page 7. The Complete Street Policy acknowledges that the Bicycle and Pedestrian Committee has no regulatory authority. But we still make solid recommendations, and it would be up to zoning to enforce who would enforce the recommendations to make sure it's intact?
It is up to, it's usually going to be up to DPW and/or some people, like your board that has the authority to instruct DPW or direct DPW, because most of the time it's on public land, public roadways. And so our group, the Bicycle and Pedestrian Committee, has never had regulatory authority, and that wording was put in there just to ensure that this policy didn't give us regulatory authority. We don't want regulatory authority. We aren't asking for it. But the Bike and Ped Committee will be doing, going forward, is keeping track of what the town has been doing with Complete Streets and doing an annual report, and then reporting back to this board, reporting to TPZ, reporting to DPW, and just giving an outline of where things stand on a yearly basis, and possibly then also making adjustments to this policy. So that statement, it's nothing new really, because we haven't had regulatory authority, but it was asked to be put in there.
Right. And then, that's a solid answer. Over that. Page 9, Department of Public Works and the Bicycle Pedestrian Committee shall meet and review and make recommendations to improve policies and procedures and design standards associated with site plans and other requirements for development to ensure best practices are being utilized. Now, are we talking like public works, road widening, or are we talking development as a new business, like a restaurant comes in and we're looking towards telling the restaurant what they should do or make a recommendation on that?
This particular statement is talking about any policies or guidelines that Department of Public Works or any other town department might have that has to do with transportation improvements, that is something already in writing, for example, that might need a little tweaking here or there to make sure that it's aligned with this policy. In an example that you're bringing up, for if a new project is coming in, like a restaurant or something like that, there are anything that's on the private property portion of that, they obviously have to get site plan approval from TPZ. TPZ does have some recommendations that are already aligned with this policy. For example, they require a pedestrian and bicycle plan as part of the application. We didn't mention that in here because it's sort of separate, but that's the kind of thing that we would hope TPZ or DPW would add in if they see it as a need. If it gets brought to their attention maybe by the Bike Ped Committee or any other committee, they can say, this this would be a good addition to the TPZ regulations or DPW regulations, and is aligned with this policy, do you think you could include it, and then they would vet it and decide what they'd like to do?
So this is just something that just kicked in my head right now. If we're talking about increasing substantially the size of a school, would we refer the increase to you to see if the school can accommodate safely?
Whoever would be the consultant or in-house reviewers of the designs of that would take this policy and see that it's, that any part of the interaction with the public roadways is being, considered when it comes to this. The Bike Ped Committee could certainly review site plans just like any other member of the public can, and we would put our input in. If there was something that we noted that said, why don't you look at page blah, blah, blah on the complete streets policy because of this, so we would have some input that way. But we don't have, back to that other statement, we don't actually have regulatory authority to say approve or deny anything, but we can make recommendations.
And I would point out, especially with a school building committee, that comes back before this board when they're looking for approval for the plan and funding. So we have a point to point out those questions, ask those questions, and determine whether we think they should address more of that along the guidelines that are being presented. So it's really up to this board to help enforce that if it's appropriate on that project. And I appreciate the fact that you've been very flexible in terms of doing this where it's practical and makes sense, and may not cause an overwhelming cost increase to a given project.
That's good. One final thing I had, page 13, the sort of the checklist. If you change the checklist, can you bring it back to the Board of Selectmen to approve the changes to the checklist?
I don't see why not, sure. There's two appendixes. One is the checklist and one is the performance measures. And these are likely to be changed in years to come because they are an initial, an initial check on how we can measure the policy and how the plans that are developed can measure themselves against the policy, so to speak, with the checklist. And so we would anticipate that as we all become more familiar with adhering to the guidelines in here, that those two things could be updated, fairly regularly. Well, I want to say fairly regularly, but on a regular basis as appropriate, really.
So I thought I remember reading in here, and I thought I put a mark and I don't see it, but I thought there was a great spot to add. After your approval, send it to the Board of Selectmen for approval to any changes to the checklist block.
Sure.
Those are my recommendations.
Okay, thank
So
you.
thank you very much for everybody's hard work.
Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Bateson, do you have any follow-on comments?
Yeah, just a couple of things. When I was reading through this material, I viewed this in light of what we're doing, like Bill had just mentioned, lots at Kings Highway, and it sounds like we're already in this business. That it didn't see, no offense to the committee, it doesn't sound earth-shattering. It's like, I thought we were already doing this.
I think that to the extent that we're already putting in sidewalks and looking for things like that, yes. I think this
Now, what does
helps-
this do? Just throw it into a context that makes us view that project differently?
It helps us define what components of sidewalks and how to design the sidewalks and how to design the crosswalks and that type of thing to integrate pedestrian as well as bike traffic on the roadways. And I think that that's going to pay off big time as we start to have, as we look at other things, we ask for what's the plan? That our board has asked that question several times. I think this helps us address what's the plan, where are we going, what's the vision, how does all this integrate, so we don't have one concept of sidewalks and bike lanes for one neighborhood having trouble interfacing or integrating when they get to the next neighborhood or next project, so that these things now have a way of being integrated and consistent from street to street, from neighborhood to neighborhood, and I think it gives us an overall vision for how to address that. It's something that, and I really appreciate the idea of looking at how we integrate this into existing projects and what's taking place. And I think maybe one of the other questions, and Mr. Hurley, if I could get you back up here for just a minute, if you let me, okay to finish on?
Yeah.
Talk to us about let's say Kings Highway, because one of the questions earlier is how does this integrate on state roads? So talk to us about that project. If we had these guidelines in place, how would that help us or provide input to Kings Highway, or is that all so defined in detail by the state that we really can't impact that?
For the Kings Highway project, That would be correct. Because it's a state highway, they kind of set the guidelines for it. But in the application process, where we basically almost had a complete street policy, we had several meetings. The one that kicked it off was, I remember, a hot summer day. We had 25 people come up just for a public information meeting and say, should we apply for this grant? And that caught the state's attention right off the bat. And then when we weighed all the different factors, we would have liked to have this bike lane and sidewalks. But because the state was, I'm trying to think of the word, they were insistent on having that median there because they felt that median reduces accidents and conflicts, we were unable to put the bike lane in. But there's nothing preventing anyone from riding the bike on there if you're a professional cyclist. And if not, there are other
What
alternatives.
if you're an amateur?
Yeah, well, that's what I was getting at. If you're an amateur, I would suggest Castle Avenue or maybe Commerce Drive off peak hours, But there are some other alternatives, and then you can pick and choose. But I think it was really the key was for the application and getting the approval process for that.
What I'm worried about is the juncture, say, state highway, state road to town road. Will our complete streets policy, as it's defined here, match up well with the state's policy?
Yeah, it should, because, again, both the state's policy and this policy will has to meet ADA requirements. It has to meet various zoning requirements for our side. And typically, the sidewalks are at least 5 feet. It might vary 5 or 6, again, depending on if it's a local where you hug up against the curb or if there's a grass strip. But those are things that you could easily do in a transitional phase. And so there really should be no problem, because we're following almost the same set of rules outside of the state highway. They have the jurisdiction if there was something.
Thank you.
come up.
Mr. Bateson,
Sure.
thank you for letting me join in.
Yeah, quick thing, Bill, while I got you
Oh,
up here. What level of implementation do you see on this? Let's say, I understand like a Kings Highway project. What if this summer we just did some work on Mill Plain Road, paving or whatever project we had there? Now, would you review that in light of this when it comes to striping the street?
For Mill Plain Road, if it's where it involves engineering design, we would definitely get involved.
No, I'm just saying, all I saw was like a resurfacing of Mill Plain Road.
Oh, on that there, probably not, because it's the micro paving, it's an overlay, we wouldn't get involved. Now, if it involved widening the road, or doing some handicap ramps, or additional sidewalks, then definitely we would get involved with that.
Okay, and the nuts and bolts of administering or implementing the project, I see here where it says TPZ. Maybe this is just for the board. I would view what I'm reading here, since there's no enforcement authority, that the opinions that TPC received from them would essentially be viewed as public comment? Is that how they would treat it?
Perhaps a little bit more than that, but in essence, because they don't have regulatory authority, so
Right.
TP&Z can listen to it as they choose. You would hope that everybody's working toward the same goal. You would hope that they appreciate this. And TPC in the past has supported these kind of policies and incorporated them into their rules and regs. But on any one project, on any one street, they can choose to say, not this time.
And I see this as a big impact on us as municipal projects. But when it comes to private development, I'm not seeing a lot. So
And again, I'm gonna defer to
on-
Mr. Hurley in
on
terms
that
of
one
what
No, Metro
there-
Center different, but
No,
I'm saying
no,
let's.
But that, I think, will really be dependent on the zoning board itself. Right now, currently, in discussions with zoning and knowing some of the zoning board members, they are definitely proactive, and recently have had a series of changes in the zoning regulations for the private businesses or development. I think that you mentioned there was a requirement of bike pedestrian plan. And recently, they revised the sidewalk where it used to be 4 feet for residential and 5 for commercial. And now we're in a commercial area or an area where you're hugging up against a curb because, there's always snow and there's always, just the comfort level being so close to the traffic. They've added now where you have to do 6 feet if you're next to a curb. So giving that 2 extra, or the 1 or 2 extra, depending, feet of comfort makes a big difference to someone.
Mr. Bates, in question, let's take Sanford Street, which is currently going under some renovation there. How would this impact Sanford Street? Have you been down?
exactly. No,
Because that's a town road under town jurisdiction and not so much a zoning issue as it is engineering that's defining those things.
Well,
How
for
would
the,
this
for the
impact it?
drainage one, what we made sure is that we were not going to cut off existing pedestrian paths. Sanford Street unfortunately has a limited right-of-way, and it's used up pretty much the whole thing. But we made sure, like, the catch basin wouldn't be put near, right at a handicap ramp. There was another area where we were doing a dry well, and we are disturbing the existing sidewalk and the brick streetscape there. And so in the plans, we said you had to restore it, back to normal and make sure it still, met ADA and all that other stuff. So a lot of this, like you said before, a lot of this stuff is already in there and it's implemented. It's just kind of putting it in print and giving it a little bit more bite.
Bill, wouldn't that also mean if this policy's in place, you would have to just run it by the Bicycle and Pedestrian Committee at some point if you were starting the Sanford Street project?
If it, especially if it was beginning. See, I look
Yeah,
at
that's
this,
right.
the
This
existing
was-
Sanford Street would be, really, it's a mini reconstruction or something like that. But I'm trying to think of a good example of.
but that's the
Well,
other-
if we
the
ever
other
did
change.
sidewalks on Round Hill Road, or if there was a, for Grassmere, we're gonna be applying for a grant at Grassmere. And we did a road safety audit on that, and that linked some of the deficiencies of sidewalks and pedestrians. And so having the complete streets policy, if the state didn't require it, would force us to abide, which is a good thing, and we're probably doing it anyway, but it's just an extra layer to make sure that we abide by it. But like you said, it's not regulatory. So if for some reason, I'm trying to think of a good example where for some reason the town didn't want to do something, it was too cost prohibitive. I'll bring that one up, Barlow Road, for instance, where there's a huge rock outcrop, and to get the 1 extra foot of sidewalk would probably cost, I'll just arbitrarily say, hundreds of thousands of dollars for that 1 extra foot. I don't know if it would be probably cost prohibitive, and so therefore, that would be one of the, quote, excuses allowed in the document.
Okay.
As
So I'm
an
looking at that,
example.
what I hear you saying is that these are guidelines that, in general, we've been trying to follow or move towards. right?
Correct.
And by having this policy in place, that becomes both documentation and to some degree a refinement. So it's clear in terms of what we're trying to do. So it's not what we remember to do, it's kind of what we're trying to do. And if it doesn't work at some point, we have outs to allow for that, so we don't unreasonably increase the cost of a project or
Exactly.
prohibit a project from going forward because it can't meet this. But wherever it is implementable, and by having it in writing, that gives us consistency from project to project. Is that fair?
Yes, it is.
Okay, sorry. And
No, that's exactly what I see in this.
If I could just add, we're fortunate that we have, Bill Hurley in our engineering department and DPW that thinks about pedestrians and bicyclists. I mean, not every town or municipality does do that. And we are fortunate that Bill has had this in his, planning, working, on his drawing board for years, actually, as you've been alluding to. But this as Mike just said, it puts it in a document, it puts all of the information in one place. It supports things that Bill does, it supports things that TPZ does. It shows to the state and federal agencies that are putting out grants that the town is committed to this. And so that's a lot what this policy does for us.
I would think with 11 elementary schools, we obviously have a lot of walking taking place throughout town. And when you look at when we talk about Fairfield, we very often bring up the fact that we're one of the few towns in the state where you can walk to the beach, walk to downtown, and walk to the train. And if Mr. Jalo was here from the History Museum, he'd be telling me, and you can walk to our historical green too. And those four components you won't find in another town. So all of this helps promote the walkability, which in the long run keeps cars off the street, which is one of the long-term goals. So thank you for all that. Any further questions from the board?
I found the spot I want to add to Board of Selectmen. It's on page 9, under step 1, number 3. It says the Bicycle and Pedestrian Committee shall review and update the checklist. When you guys review it and update it, if you can send it back to the Board of Selectmen so we can see what your update recommendation is, if you can figure out a way to add us to that process.
Yep, okay.
And I would just say my concern is adding too much and overburdening, developers and everything, depending upon what comes out. So that's why I'm asking for that extra level.
Just one quick, would you want to just be notified, like if it was one item on the checklist, I don't know, would we have to go to the Board of Selectmen meeting? I'm just curious.
Like to vote on it or just notify us?
That's my question.
That is a good, I would ask the board.
And then if you felt it was necessary to put on the agenda, then of course it would go on. I'm just wondering.
Notification.
Yeah, notification, just general
And if the
notification.
notification got our fur up, then we'd take action.
Exactly. That's-
And I think that if we could define that just a little bit more, that it's clear, you could send that to us and notify us of the change, but immediately thereafter ask us if we wish to have a formal presentation before the board.
Yep.
So we get a chance to, we make sure we ask ourselves that, if you will.
I like that better.
Okay?
Sure, and I would anticipate that we have an annual report that the Bike Ped Committee will be doing on this. It
You
will
can-
likely show up there.
You can save your changes up to that point, that would be really helpful.
I don't think they'll be that critical. I hope.
That's a good refinement.
All right.
All right, Chris, is it okay if we,
I'm good with that.
all right, can you all just, you're going to just add that in so we have
Yes.
that as part of the step?
Definitely.
All right, so that's, and Chris, were other points were there? That was clearly a bit of an edit. Were there any other edits that you
No, the
wanted?
state streets, I think, was defined. I think it was explained. I don't think there's much we can do to add that. That would be the only edit I would request
Okay,
in there.
all right, and
No.
Mr. Bates, are you comfortable?
Yep, good with that?
All right, so the motion before our board, was to hear, consider, and endorse. Gee, I'm not sure we had so can I have a motion
I'll make a motion.
and a second?
Second?
All right, and we use the term endorse there, just not to make sure we don't want to step on any other board's toes or get into any entanglements of what we're telling somebody else to do. By endorsing it, we're both endorsing this as an approach and philosophy and asking for their support and to incorporate it as appropriate.
I'm bored.
All right?
Sounds good.
All right, any comments from the public? Seeing none, back to the board. Are we ready to vote?
Yes.
All in favor?
Aye.
You have your endorsement.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody. That was great.
Thank you.
All right, next up, department head salary and benefit review, and I believe we have a handout in our packet, the long legal sheet.
Yep.
So if you'll take a look at that. Wish they could make this type bigger,
Right, thank you.
but short of that, I guess I would open it up for any discussion.
Yeah, I noticed this, during the summer, I was expecting us to get our regular meeting, and when we didn't, I just assumed you were on a freeze, like you were last year. and I happened to run into Michelangelo at a meeting, and I found out that there were some raises given out. That's why I prompted the conversation with you on the phone. And I didn't like the way that transpired for the simple fact that I really want to leave this process at this level. I know that this, I'm going to say, where are we in fiscal 19?
Correct.
Fiscal 19 is out the door. There's nothing we can do about that because that's been approved, and I get that. My point being, I think, I like the fact that you front-loaded this into the budget, and I think we should incorporate it into since now we're separate from the Board of Finance, well, soon to be, when it comes to budget. I think that part of our thing should be here's my department in March, whenever you plan on doing the budget or whatever, and say, this is it. This is what I'm planning on giving department heads. And that'll be part of our discussion at that level.
So let me suggest that we take this sheet, just update it with another year, so we have a 5-year look back, if that's okay. And in February, which I think I think it's in February, I'll be presenting a recommendation to you all, and we make this as one of our steps in our review of the budget.
Yeah, which I don't have a problem with.
No. Well, and
I think that the raises should be effective the beginning of the fiscal year. I think it's always been a little bit too late that it was retro, you know?
They were effective, it was retro in some cases. This makes it definitely effective July 1, and I think that was one of our goals, is to make sure that we weren't going through the economic gyrations of having to, or financial gyrations of having to pay folks. Doing it in February shouldn't be a problem.
I think doing it in February makes more sense than doing it in July/August.
Yeah, because it is part of the budget.
So it is, I agree with that. The surprise, I think, came because we had a change in the way we did it, that it was in the budget. We weren't notified that it was in the budget. It was one of those things.
Well, I take it, Chris, I thought we had talked about that. If we didn't, I apologize, but I thought we had talked about that, but
I wasn't here.
There were a number of conversations we had back and forth at that point, but, so if I didn't make that clear, I apologize. But the intent was to make that clear so there was that it was transparent in terms of what we're doing. But we can definitely incorporate this step into the February, so there's absolutely no question about
No,
that.
I would, I would like to. It was certainly something I didn't check going through the budget process. I would have, but if we set it now that we're going to do it in February, I'm okay with that, because I do think, in this situation, it's important to highlight the good work the department heads have done and have the acknowledgement from the Board of Selectmen for a job well done, and have that dialogue, and then have a dialogue of health insurance contribution, and keep things, sort of separate where we should be going with that, so.
All right, we will do that.
I would like to see health insurance go up, though, contribution.
We are, well, one, that is a decision this board can make.
Yeah.
As you're thinking about that, please consider that at this point, our benefits package is not competitive with other towns.
I get it.
And that limits our pool of being able to hire people across.
I get it, and I totally get it, but I think that's a conversation we can have in February. Another thing, too, I want to bring up, since I think the time is appropriate now, is we should start, your review's coming up, right? We're at the 4 years, for yours, and there's somebody else.
For ours, Mr. Bateson, for ours.
The Board of Selectmen, and there's somebody else?
The town clerk.
Town clerk, that'll be under the Board of Finance.
That's under the Board of Finance.
But I think, too, we should...
Registrar of Voters comes up before us, but not on this cycle, not this year.
Right, but if that's something you want to start planning for, if you want to start that committee again, such as what you did before, I mean, where are we now? We're going to be in October? Maybe that's something, get them working on that, so that we would have numbers ready for us in February.
That sounds, well...
Now, I don't know if that's something you set
Here's-
up or we set up. I think it was called the First Selectmen's Task Force.
No, it was Board of Selectmen. Here's the issue. That's not going to, when does that take in? It is part of this budget. It doesn't take effect till after the election.
Correct.
So it doesn't take effect till, I'm going to say December 1st, roughly.
Right.
But yes, we can, and it is part of the budget because it got the second half of the year on that, so we can set that up and have that in the budget recommendation.
Okay. I think that's all I had. Yeah, I mean, I had no objection to the raise, I saw the raises. I mean, it seemed to be in line with everything else, so.
I'm all set.
All right. There. Next up is the tax collector. To hear, consider, and act upon tax refunds as recommended by the tax collector in the amount of $9,057.65. May I have a motion to accept?
Make a motion.
A second.
Second.
All right, any edits or changes?
No, I confirmed the number is right.
All right, thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
That's done. I will, just to confirm, we have the item we postponed. I also believe, I'm forgetting what a couple other items were for next Wednesday's Board of Selectmen meeting. I just asked that we'll get the agenda out to Thursday or Friday this week. Just please take a look at that. I don't think there's a lot on it, but there are a couple key items. Is next Wednesday okay with everybody?
Yes. Yep.
Yeah.
All right. Next up, to hear, consider, and act upon any other business. Is there any other business to discuss?
No.
Hearing none, may I have a motion to adjourn?
I'll make a motion.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right. Thank you.
You gotta-